Hey guys, welcome to the Silver Report. It's Monday, February 6th, 2017. Silver is currently trading at $17.74. We have metal on the move here, guys. We have gold trading at $1,230.20. And let's get into some of the economic factors that are going to be playing in. And right now, I just wanted to draw your attention. Right now, this is a map, a world map, and we have the world debt percentage to GDP. And I wanted to examine some of what's going on in the world, guys, because over here we see what are known as the old world prosperous nations. For example, America, one of the richest nations in the world, supposed to have the highest GDP in the world. We see a debt ratio of about 70 to 80% of debt to GDP. But the number's actually grown since this. So we also see a suffering European Union being affected by this. Canada, Alaska. So the question is, how did we get here? So we see here back in 1965, the red line we see is the federal debt. We had zero or close to zero federal debt, total public federal debt. And the green line here is our gross domestic product. And now we see that since 1965 it remained at zero till we got around 1970, and then it began to rise. Now what we experienced here after the wake of the financial crisis is something that is very alarming. This is a very dangerous number right here, because this is where our national debt crossed our gross domestic product line. From this point on, we were then operating above our national gross domestic product. And so something took place right around this time that began this rise and continued on. August 15th, 1971. On August 15th, 1971, President Richard M. Nixon announced his new economic policy, a program to create a new prosperity without war. Because prior to that, we had the gold standard, and so prosperity is only created by war, in essence, known colloquially as the Nixon shock. The initiative marked the beginning of the end of the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates established at the end of World War II. So the Nixon shock was a series of economic measures undertaken by the United States President Richard Nixon in 1971, the most significant of which was the unilateral cancellation of the direct international convertibility of the United States dollar to gold. While Nixon's actions did not formally abolish the existing Bretton Woods system of international finance exchange, the suspension of one of its key components effectively rendered the Bretton Woods system inoperative. While Nixon publicly stated his intention to resume direct convertibility of the dollar after reforms to the Bretton Woods system had been implemented, all attempts at reform proved unsuccessful. By 1973, the Bretton Woods system was replaced de facto by a regime based on freely floating fiat currencies that remain in place to this present day. So what took place during that time period to cause the dramatic shift in debt was that the United States now needed to borrow every dollar into existence. So what we saw previously during this time frame, where we begin to see the rise directly as it took effect. And from that point, we had to print and borrow every dollar into existence because we disconnected from the gold standard. Now the issue, during the time he said that there was intentions to return to the gold standard. After World War II, most of Europe brought their gold over the United States to protect it, so that whatever happened in Nazi Germany would never happen again. At which point some of these countries began to demand their gold back. And when this happened, the United States printed more dollars and gave them dollars in exchange for their gold. In essence, said, instead of your gold, we'll give you more US dollars in exchange for the gold, and separated and disconnected the dollar from the gold standard. Now what we saw since that time, now we don't have any figures before then, but since 1980 alone, this is a chart of the money supply. M2 would cover the amount of dollars. There's other different categories for money supplies that were created, but this covers cash, coins, all fiat currencies in the form of tradable units. So 1980, we've seen a non-stop increase of the money supply. This corresponds with the increase of the debt, because it is necessary to continuously increase the money supply in order to pay off the debt. For every dollar that is borrowed into existence, $1.3 is owed to the Federal Reserve. So what we see is a dangerous line here that is created. The money supply has continuously increased over time, decreasing the buying power of the United States dollar. Now, the reason this starts at 1980 is going to be very important in a coming slide. But take a note of this at this time. This was the money supply in 1980, and we're here now crossing over 2015. Now this is a very dangerous line right here. What we see here is the consumer price index. Along with the increase in the money supply, we see the increase in the price for all urban consumers for all items. So with the increase in the money supply, we see an increase in the price. So therefore, we're not getting richer by increasing the money supply. In fact, we're getting poorer, because we see the rise, and it begins to differentiate massively, larger gaps here. But what we see taking place right here is that we had a stagnation. We had some interest rate policy changes implemented previous to this time during the Great Recession. As we see this darkened line, it symbolizes a recession. But this is during the Great Recession. We saw 0% interest rates created right around here. So we slowed inflation at that level, and we had a stagnant economy. What we had previous to that was a non-circulation of money. So this line is artificially kept lower just because of the severity of the problems and trying to reconfigure. And what we saw during this time, in just a 5-year period from 2010 to 2015, we saw the largest increase in the volume of money created in the United States in its history at one single time. One single 5-year period. And what the issue is, why this is so important. This number is the consumer price index. It's the price of goods, which is extremely at a very highly elevated levels. And that because this money supply, the problem with the money velocity we were talking about in a previous video is that money is not circulating, but the supply has so dramatically increased that this number, when it increases, will be massive. It will rise massively, because along with the disconnect from the US dollar to gold and the increase in money supply, this inflation rate, this consumer cost of living rate, has always increased with the amount of money supply. It's just during this time, when the money supply increased such a drastic amount at one time, and the 0% interest rates were not able to have this keep up. So what we're facing coming up in the immediate future is hyperinflation, is the snapback of this level right here above this line. So what it will do, in essence, it will decrease the value of the currency essentially overnight. Now we have here a timeline of the federal debt and the speed of repayment. So we have had debts before, and it's normally in times of great war. Now, to think about it, back in 1870 we had the Civil War. It took us from 1870, the peak of it, down to around 1900. We had that debt almost essentially paid off. Now, this is in America on a gold standard, with gold-backed money. And so we were able to pay it off because we were not always having to ever increasingly raise the money supply in order to pay the debt. During World War II, we had World War I, we had some massive debt. And we were able to begin to pay that debt number off. During the Great Depression, we incurred some debt. We had a real slowdown. But then World War II, we had a more increase in spending. We went to war. But after becoming the victors of the war, this debt decreased. Though it was so large, the largest it's ever been, was able to decrease dramatically because at this point we were still tied to a gold standard. And we were able to pay off the debt. Now what happened, again, at this key, pivotal moment in history, where we disconnected from the gold standard and went on to a freely floating fiat-based money system, we now incur debts the same way that we used to, except for this debt is not a result of a war to 1998. It's not a result of a major, all these other marks on here, Civil War, World War I, Great Depression, World War II, major events in the history of America. Now, kind of just as a normal standard, we're going to have an increase of the debt. But what we see here is the lack of the ability to pay it off. Now, we did find some ways to be able to start taking this debt down then, but what we incurred during the crisis 2008 and 2009 was a dramatic increase of the money supply. And right now, this is why we're facing this debt crisis. We have mounting U.S. debt almost to $20 trillion. This was the 2014 numbers, and it was projected to go a little bit lower. But in all reality, we're up to $20 trillion now, so the real number should be around here. And what we're facing is that the only way to be able to continuously pay the debt is to print more money. And it's very serious. The rise in consumer loans during this same time frame, we saw back then that we were able to begin to pay down the debt, and we had the slowdown, the dot-com bubble burst right here is called a recession. Another one in the beginning of 1990. But what we saw here is the rise in consumer loans, because not only since the Clinton administration have we had an increase in the money supply and an increase of the national debt, but we've also had an increase of consumer individual loans at all consumer banks, which is a continuously rising number because since that time, the standard of living in the United States has dropped dramatically. We saw the inflation continuously rise. We saw the cost of living continuously rise, and the ability for people to continue to live as they did in the good old days back in 1980 is now gone. It's highly dependent upon loans, upon borrowing, and this is just personal consumer debt. We see the speed at which this can take hold by comparing Japan, the time it took from the same policies to reach an unrecoverable level. Now in Japan, they have a very similar monetary system, where it's a fiat-based system and they can print money. They ran into some issues back here in 1995, during that same time. They were reaching a dangerous level of debt, which was about 95% to GDP. So they began to print money in order to try to solve the problem. And what they reached is the same thing that we're facing now. And I'll show you just how quickly this can happen. In just 10 years, it went from 95% of GDP to almost 200. In 10 more years, we see that it went to 250% of GDP is their debt. They've reached a cycle of debt which it can never be paid, and it causes a rapid devaluing of the currency. And we see here in the United States, since that time, is along with the printing of money, we have a rising of the U.S. debt to GDP. And right now, we've crossed a very pivotal number. This line right here would be 100%, and this was at 2015. So we crossed this line past 100% of GDP. And we saw back here, within only 20 years, Japan went from below that line to 250% using the same policies, which show that we're in a very dangerous time for America if we continue on this case. And now another dangerous fact. We see a dramatic rise in outstanding debt. So not only is personal debt increasing since this time period of 1970, when we disconnected the dollar from the gold standard, but we see outstanding debt, the inability, along with the inflated prices and cost of living, the inflation that rises and the currency supply that rises, we see an inability to keep up by the average consumer. A new thing that we saw developing down here in the year 2000 was we saw consumer loans, credit cards, other revolving plans, all commercial banks begin to rise, outstanding, begin to have people unable to pay back these loans. Student loans owed and securitized, outstanding. We saw in 2006, people began to not pay these loans because we saw the jobs collapsing. We saw the economy collapsing during this time period. What we also see here is motor vehicle loans that are unable to be paid back, on the rise during the same time period and going up. We see all types of loans. We're living on borrowed time. And household and nonprofit organization, home mortgages, liability levels. And during the peak of the housing crisis, we saw that the maximum that we reached right here, where it became just an inability to sustain it because of the amount of people with the increase in housing prices, unable to pay it, unable to reach the inflation levels, because we had reached dangerous levels, which that snapback that I warned you about is going to cause the exact same thing in the very direct near future. And now, a very important thing that took place when they changed this. During the Hunt brothers' accumulation of silver back in the 1979, the price of silver bullion raised from $11 an ounce in 1979 to $49.45 an ounce in January 1980, based on the London PM fix. Now, this is a very significant number. In 1979, $50 in 1980 is the equivalent of $146 in 2017 dollars. And we got back into the disconnect that took place during that time. There was immediate shock to the system, the Nixon shock to the system. Taking America, we took silver out of the coins in 1964. By the time 1970 hit, in 1969, we began to eliminate all 40% coins. And then we took silver completely out of the coinage, disconnected gold from the US dollar, and we saw a runaway in the price and a fear among the populace and a rise. So only from 1964, where an ounce of silver was a silver dollar, a standard ounce, to 1980, we saw it rise to $50, the equivalent in today's money of $146.45. The figures on how we arrive at that number are here below. Now, the purchasing power is continuously dropping, and this is the issue that we're facing today. It comes back to this snapback back here, because when we cross this line in the increase of money supply, we are set to see, we are devaluing the currency every time we increase the money supply. We are set to see a massive snapback and hyperinflation, which will drive the price of silver similar to what took place during this time when there was this massive rise, this massive inflation, this disconnect right here. Only it'll be much worse this time. So what we see is $147 an ounce silver is not out of the question, but it's a very realistic number, which is why the Federal Reserve cannot raise interest rates. It will cause a major issue for the United States currency. All right, thank you guys so much for stopping by. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe. There'll be more videos just like this. Like the videos, share. The only way to awaken the masses of the danger we're in with our current currency manipulation and currency print and structure. We have a failed system, and we see that since the disconnect, since America left real money, the dramatic increase in debt, not only for the populace but for the government, and the increase in the amount of money and the decrease of the buying power that has taken place, this is inevitable that the price of silver will rise. The only thing that is keeping it low at this point is price suppression, because of the fear that if the desire for gold and silver were to take hold, as it did back in 79, we will see runaway prices and a rapid running away. And this figure that they have of the massive increase in currency supply will cause an immediate crash of the dollar. And people's eyes need to be opened to what is going on in our country. So share the videos, guys. It's the best way to make the greatest impact. And I thank you guys so much for joining me here on the Silver Report. Above all, stay safe. Hey guys, thanks for joining me again. I told you we had something special coming up. So what we're going to do, I just got a nice package in the mail. Got 2 brand new 2017 Canadian Maples. Man, I love these coins. What a beautiful coin that is. Oh, I guess you're wondering about the title of the video. That's right. This is Free Silver February, guys. And I figured since the channel's been doing so good and picking up so many subscribers, I thought it was time to give a little something back to my audience. So for every person who subscribed, all you have to do, guys, is comment on 3 different videos the message Free Silver February. And for everybody who types the message Free Silver February in 3 different videos, each 3 videos, you're entered in for a chance to win one of these brand new silver Canadian Maples. Brand new, never touched by human hands. Well, at least since they've been in my possession. Brand new spotless coins. And they're yours, guys. I'll pay shipping. So if you want to partake in the contest, all you gotta do is be subscribed. Type in Free Silver February. I'll make it even sweeter. Every 3 videos you post that comment in, you're entered in. So there's no limit. The only limit is the amount of videos, because it's gotta be on 3 separate videos. Alright, and I'll make it even sweeter since the channel's been doing so well, guys. And if you're new to this channel, we talk a little bit about politics, a little bit about the current economic crisis we're facing that they're trying to ignore. It's kind of one of those fake news sites they've been warning you about. So this is what I'm going to do, guys, since it's been doing so good. If we surpass 1,000 subscribers, which I'm assuming we will, at the current rate, we'll blow past that before the end date, February 27th, 2017, I'm going to double it. So you get 2 ounces of silver, and even more than that, I'll throw in 5 mercury dimes. Absolutely free. I'll pay shipping, and we're going to do the drawing live, guys. Good old-fashioned pull names out of a hat. You know what I mean. So here's your chance, guys, if you want to enter in. It's not that difficult for all my audience, all my faithful subscribers. Everyone who subscribed, all you have to comment is Free Silver February, and you're in. Alright, but thank you guys for joining me. This message is effective January 27th, 2017. Let the games begin.